Hello everyone. In this episode, I would like to talk about the puppet troops and traitors I heard about during the War of Resistance against Japan. There is a scene in the film Tunnel Warfare in which the militia captain, Gao Chuanbao, rings a bell beneath a large locust tree and shouts, "More than 100 Japanese soldiers and more than 200 puppet troops are invading." This scene reflects a harsh reality of that time. Among the forces harming the Chinese people, puppet troops often outnumbered the Japanese army itself. My mother once said, "Without traitors, the Japanese would have been deaf and blind." The traitors knew our villages, our people, and our weaknesses. It was precisely because the Japanese relied on traitors and puppet troops that the war of resistance against Japan was so prolonged and difficult. While the Japanese carried out the three alls policy in the 8th Route Army's base areas, kill all, burn all, loot all, the traitors often went even further, looting everything in sight. I heard of a particularly horrifying atrocity committed by a traitor leader in our county. It was said that a Japanese platoon leader had been severely wounded by a landmine, his intestines blown out. In an attempt to curry favor, the traitor believed that intestines were needed for surgery. He seized a beggar from the street, killed him, cut open his abdomen, removed the intestines, and presented them to the Japanese doctor as a gift. In reality, those who genuinely surrendered to the Japanese were often local thugs or notorious bandits even before the war. After the 8th Route Army arrived, it carried out united front work and attempted to win over some bandit groups. As long as they sincerely resisted Japan, they were treated as allies. However, most bandits chose to surrender to the Japanese instead and assisted them in massacring Chinese civilians. In the later stages of the war, as Japan's defeat became increasingly clear, some traitors, seeking to save their own lives, secretly assisted the 8th Route Army. One traitor leader secretly released a group of captured communist cadres and, as a result, was himself released shortly after being captured. After Japan's surrender, another traitor leader, originally a bandit, gathered his followers in the county town and resisted stubbornly. Before the 8th Route Army launched its attack, a former puppet officer who knew the situation volunteered to persuade the traitor to surrender, on the condition that his life be spared. The 8th Route Army reportedly agreed. Persuaded by the puppet officer, the traitor surrendered, and the county town was taken without a single shot fired. However, following a mass rally, the traitorous leader was publicly executed. The former puppet officer was deeply dissatisfied, claiming that the 8th Route Army had broken its promise. In fact, the execution was understandable. First, public anger had to be addressed. Sparing such a notorious traitor would have been impossible to justify to the people. Second, circumstances had changed fundamentally. The Japanese army had already surrendered, and the traitor was surrounded with no means of escape. Justice was inevitable. These events were recounted by people who personally experienced the war of resistance against Japan, with names and details clearly described. Today, so many years later, I only remember the general outline and no longer recall the specific names. During the war, the 8th Route Army's campaign to eliminate traitors and punish local tyrants was also highly effective. One such incident involved two of my distant uncles. They later recounted it during a review meeting. I remember this meeting took place in 1974, during the Cultural Revolution. Members of the 38th Army of the People's Liberation Army were sent to our village to support the left, and a squad leader was assigned to our small group. Because it was winter, the meeting was held in a cattle shed. Everyone was required to conduct self-examination, confess past misdeeds by themselves or their elders, describe organizations they had been involved in, and report on one another. At that meeting, my two distant uncles spoke of an incident from the early days of the War of Resistance. One uncle said that late one night, guerrilla fighters under the 8th Route Army came to his house and ordered him to go to the other uncle's home and pretend to persuade him to surrender to the Japanese. He had no choice but to comply. It was already deep into the night, and the house was locked. The 8th Route Army had quietly taken positions at the front and back of the house. As instructed, the uncle shouted through the window, "The Japanese are here now. People from the neighboring village have all gone to surrender. Let's go too." Anyone who came out in response would be identified as a traitor. the uncle who was being tested later recalled that he was asleep when he heard noises on the roof. Immediately alert, he realized something was wrong when he heard talk of surrendering to the Japanese. No matter what was said outside, he resolved not to leave the house. Later, the uncle who had shouted told him, "It's a good thing you didn't come out. Otherwise, you would have been killed." As for why that uncle had been targeted for the test, no one could say for certain. In fact, throughout the entire war of resistance against Japan, not a single person from our village became a traitor or a puppet soldier. In short, whether in the past or the present, fortresses are most easily breached from within. The traitors of the war of resistance against Japan brought immeasurable disaster to the Chinese nation. I would like to conclude with an excerpt from Liu Xinru's article The Torture of History, written on the 70th anniversary of victory in the war of resistance against Japan. The phenomenon of traitors was the greatest pain point for the Chinese nation during the war of resistance against Japan. We rightly praise the unprecedented national awakening that followed a century of decline. Countless patriots wrote an epic of resistance with their lives and blood. Yet we must not forget that at the most critical moment for the Chinese nation, countless traitors betrayed their country, surrendered to the enemy, sold out their nation for personal gain, recognized the enemy as their master, and aided evil, leaving an indelible stain on Chinese history. History has proven one truth: those who betray their country and willingly become collaborators and lackeys will ultimately meet a tragic end. Their crimes will forever be recorded in the annals of the Chinese nation, and their names will remain engraved on the pillar of historical shame. That concludes this episode. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.